It is indeed a jumble of numbers, and I have to admit that political journalists are being briefed as we speak on exactly what these mean by Dido Harding, who is in charge of that test, track and trace regime. So actually there'll be more information on this when we've had that full briefing. But what we can say for now is that 8,000 people, around 8,000 people, as you say, were identified with having COVID-19, and around 5,000 of them actually provided contact details. That's all the people that they'd been in close contact with. They provided that to the contact tracers. Now, those contact tracers then went out and rang them, and that ended up in around 32,000 people being contacted to say that you may or may not have had contact with someone who had coronavirus. 26,000 of them were asked to self-isolate. Now, what we don't know at the moment is the number who actually have agreed to self-isolate, and that really is crucial because, of course, this is a test, track and trace regime that relies on people adhering to the instruction to stay at home, but there's no enforcement of that rule at the moment. The government has said that they expect people to take it seriously and to stay at home if there's any potential that they might have come into contact with a sufferer. The whole system breaks down if they don't do that, so it's going to be crucial to find out how many have actually agreed to self-isolate, and we'll bring you those figures when we have them. What we do know, though, is that around 79% of those contacts were reached within 24 hours, so not quite 100%. The government will be aiming to get as close to that as they possibly can, because, of course, the longer you're left to roam around in the community, the more potential people you come into contact with. And the whole point of this system, as we know, is to try to control the spread of the virus. Speaking to people who have been working on it behind the scenes, they see these numbers as pretty positive. They think it's a good first step, and they are, of course, moving towards making it work more effectively as the lockdown is lifted. But there's still a missing link in this whole test system, and that's the app. We were told that that was going to be crucial to helping people know who they'd come into contact with. We're now told that when lockdown is lifted, so later on this year, that will become more crucial, because when people start to move around more and they come into contact with more people, then the app will be useful in helping people to track who they may have come into contact with over time. At the moment, because most people are in lockdown and therefore not moving that much, the contact tracing system can be done by humans at the end of a telephone. One interesting thing to note from the Isle of Wight testing that's been done, the results actually show that people are much more inclined to listen if it's a person telling them they need to self-isolate rather than an app. So that may well have guided the government's thinking on how to proceed with this test, track and trace system.
Yeah, that's an interesting finding, isn't it? Just on the social distancing, Kate, we just heard Nicola Sturgeon restating the argument for the 2-metre rule to be continued with. We'll be talking to Ian Duncan-Smith, Tory grandee, former Conservative Party leader, in the next few minutes. He will argue the opposite, that 1 metre is good enough for most of the world and ought to be good enough for the UK. It will help business. Where are we heading on that?
Well, he's not alone. Ian Duncan-Smith is one of a number of very senior backbench Conservative MPs, and actually there are ministers too, who are asking Boris Johnson to do this as quickly as possible, and they want it to happen because there are a number of bars and restaurants, other venues where people mix in close proximity, who say that they just can't operate. They won't be financially viable if the 2-metre guideline is stuck to by the government. It's also a problem for schools because trying to get all the pupils crammed into classrooms and keeping them apart is proving problematic. There's not enough space. We know actually that Downing Street and Boris Johnson are also keen to lift this restriction, but they will only do so when they know that the infection rate in the community is low enough to do it without a huge risk of the virus getting out of control again. The problem is at the moment we don't know what that level has to be, so we've got no guidance as to when that might happen. But what we do know is that scientists have said 2 metres is safe at the moment because it reduces the risk from the droplets from your mouth. You can reduce that distance to 1 metre, but you might need to use other things like a mask. You may need to sit next to somebody rather than across from them if, for example, you were in a restaurant. And the government is sending a message that they are looking at this as a matter of urgency. Here is the government minister speaking to us a little bit earlier on today.
Everybody should maintain 2 metres social distancing at this point. This is the clear guidance that we've issued to everybody. It's what we want people to observe. We would love to make progress on this point, but we're not yet in a position to do that. Clearly we do take into account our own scientific evidence base, and they've been very clear that this is what they recommend.
At the end of the day, though, this will be a political decision. The scientists will advise Boris Johnson, but he will be the man who has to decide when it is the right time to reduce that limit. And there will be implications from that decision, of course. And this is still a very new virus that lots of people don't really fully understand. So a difficult time for Boris Johnson, but he is being pushed by all sides to make that decision sooner rather than later.